Welcome back. So in the last video, we covered the big picture, what the EUAI Act is, why it exists, and how the four-tier risk framework organizes the entire regulation. Great foundation. Now we need to go one level deeper because before you can classify any AI system or assess any compliance obligation, you need to answer two very basic but surprisingly tricky questions. First, does your system even qualify as AI under the law? And second, what role does your organization play in the AI value chain? These aren't just academic questions, they are the starting points for every compliance conversation. I've seen organizations spend months building AI compliance programs, and when you dig into them, they misidentified their own role from the beginning. A deployer running a provider's compliance program. A provider thinking they could rely on their downstream customers' conformity assessment. These errors are expensive. In this video, we're going to unpack the legal definition of AI, and it's simpler than you'd expect, though the edges are tricky. We're going to explore the GPAI category and why it gets its own separate set of rules. And we're going to get clear on the provider-deployer distinction, the single most practically important conceptual divide in the entire regulation. By the time we're done, you'll be able to look at any AI system in your organization and ask the right questions. Does this qualify? Who are we in relation to it? And what does that mean for our obligations? That's the goal. Let's dive in. Let's talk about what actually counts as AI under this law, because the answer might surprise you. The EU AI Act uses a definition derived from the OECD, and it's actually more elegant than people expect. An AI system under the Act is a machine-based system designed to operate with varying levels of autonomy. It processes inputs, data, instructions, sensor readings, and produces outputs like predictions, recommendations, decisions, or content. The key phrase is inferences. The system must infer something. It goes beyond simply retrieving predefined information. Think about the difference between a search engine returning results based on keywords versus a system that looks at your browsing behavior, infers your intent, and recommends products you didn't explicitly search for. The second one is more clearly AI in this sense. It makes an inference from data. What I find interesting is what the definition intentionally excludes. Traditional rule-based software. A system that runs a fixed set of if-then rules with no learning or inference is generally not an AI system under this law. Expert systems that purely look up a decision tree may also fall outside scope. The boundary isn't always crisp, but the inference element is the key distinguishing test. The definition is also intentionally future-proof. It doesn't try to list every algorithm or technique. Instead, it describes what the system does, infers, adapts, generates, rather than how it does it. That's smart lawmaking, because the technology evolves faster than any legal text can keep up with. Alright, so now that we have the definition, let's talk about where it gets genuinely tricky in practice. Because this is where practitioners earn their value. Let's take robotics. A robotic arm on a factory floor following pre-programmed movements. That's probably not AI under the Act. But a robotic arm using computer vision to adapt its grip based on the shape of the object it's holding? Now it's inferring. Now it might be in scope. Same physical machine, same factory, different software brain. Search algorithms are another interesting case. A basic keyword search algorithm is likely not AI. But a search algorithm that uses machine learning to re-rank results based on user behavior patterns? That inference layer probably brings it into scope. The same logic applies to recommendation engines. A simple customers who bought X also bought Y might be a lookup table, but a system that models user preferences across sessions to predict intent? That's inference. And then there's the evolving guidance challenge. The European Commission has committed to publishing clarifications on the definition over time. This is both helpful and challenging. Helpful because we'll get clearer answers. Challenging because the ground can shift under your feet. My practical advice is this. When you're assessing whether a system qualifies, document your reasoning thoroughly. If a regulator ever questions your classification, what matters is that you applied a rational, good faith analysis. We considered the OECD derived definition, assessed whether inference was present, and concluded the system did not qualify because. That kind of documented reasoning is your protection. Now let's talk about one of the most commercially significant categories in the entire Act: general purpose AI models. This is where the chat GPTs and Geminis of the world live, and the EU created a specific set of rules just for them. A GPAI model is trained on large amounts of data and is capable of performing a wide range of tasks. It's not built for one specific purpose, it's built to be flexible. You can use it to write emails, analyze contracts, generate code, summarize documents, answer questions. That versatility is what defines it as general purpose. Here's a distinction that catches people out: GPAI model versus GPAI system. A GPAI model is the underlying model. Think of GPT-4 or Llama as the model. A GPAI system is when that model is integrated into a product or service for a specific end use, like a customer service chatbot built on top of GPT-4. The obligations are different depending on whether you're operating the model layer or the application layer. Then there's a subset that matters most for the biggest players: systemic risk GPAI models. These are frontier models trained with compute exceeding 10 to the 25th power floating point operations. Think the most powerful frontier models in the world today. They face additional obligations: model evaluation, red teaming, adversarial testing, cybersecurity hardening, serious incident reporting. For most organizations, the GPAI section is relevant because they are deploying GPAI models through APIs. They are downstream of the model provider. Understanding what the model provider is obligated to give you, documentation, information about capabilities and limitations, is critical for your own compliance. This provider-deployer distinction is probably the single most important conceptual divide in the entire EU AI Act from a practical compliance perspective. Let me walk you through it carefully. A provider is an entity that develops an AI system and places it on the market or puts it into service. They built it, they released it. They carry the heaviest obligations: technical documentation, risk management systems, conformity assessment, post-market monitoring, logging capabilities, registration in the EU database for high-risk systems. A deployer is an entity that uses a provider's AI system under their own responsibility. They didn't build the AI, they're using it. Their obligations are different: human oversight, staff training, fundamental rights impact assessments in some cases, incident reporting, maintaining logs at the operational level. Now, here's where it gets important. A company can be both provider and deployer simultaneously. If you build your own AI system and use it internally, you are both. If you take a third-party AI model, significantly customize it, and deploy it, you may have moved from deployer into provider territory. The practical question every compliance team needs to answer is, for each AI system in our organization, are we the provider, the deployer, or both? The answer determines your compliance obligations completely. And I'll tell you from experience working on these assessments, the answer is not always obvious. A thorough review of your contracts, your technical modifications, and your intended use cases is essential before you can answer that question with confidence. So now let's talk about the scenarios that trip organizations up, where your role shifts without you realizing it, and suddenly your compliance obligations are much bigger than you expected. The most common scenario: a company licenses a high-risk AI system from a vendor and starts customizing it. They update the training data, they fine-tune the model for their specific use case, they change the intended purpose. At some point, and the Act is clear about this, substantial modification turns a deployer into a provider, and the compliance burden doubles overnight. What counts as substantial modification? The Act gives guidance. Changes that affect the AI system's compliance with the requirements, particularly changes affecting risk level, intended purpose or the technical nature of the system itself. So if you retrain the model, change what it's designed to do, or make changes that affect its safety profile, you've potentially crossed the line. Another trap: open source AI. If you take an open source GPAI model and fine-tune it for a commercial application, the original model's provider had lighter obligations because it was open source. But you may now be the provider of a new, distinct AI system with full provider obligations. The open source shield doesn't transfer. And then there's the SaaS scenario. A company uses a vendor's AI HR screening tool through a web interface. They haven't changed anything. They're clearly a deployer. But have they received everything from the provider that they need to fulfill their deployer obligations? Human oversight capability? Instructions for use? That's where the contract and the vendor relationship become compliance infrastructure. Deployers need to ask the right questions before they sign.